Okay, we're looking at Chapter 9 now, and the theme here is validation. And this is something that you guys should be familiar with from some of the other languages that you've learned. Of course, in your probably regular HTML classes, you learned that HTML5 has some built-in things that take care of validation for us and help us. The older traditional techniques are for you to write JavaScript to do that action, or to write server-side scripts of some sort that would do that action. And then since a lot of times you create data from a web application that pushes to a database, we also kind of have all the data integrity components of the database itself that kind of step in. But see, the whole point of us doing validation on the front end is to keep the database from basically failing or choking on the stuff that we're sending it, because if a database throws an error, that can really mess up your application depending on how you set it up. All right, so that's kind of the why to validate. And you know, the truth is that when we're working with websites and we're grabbing information from the user, one of the most typical ways to do that is through a form of some sort, usually like text fields and things like that. But as you guys all know, that HTML5 really kind of brought a lot of stuff that's new into the mix. What's really neat, though, is that ASP.NET does have a lot of tools built in that help us to kind of automate this process. So, in other words, there are controls that are pre-built that you can just basically pull into whatever form elements that you're using and make a couple of quick menu selections in the property windows and basically enable validation just like that. Now, that's very cool because it's very simple to do. The way that you guys are going to start here is you are going to start by building a form, but the one thing that we should clarify for you, and maybe I said this the other day for you, is that whenever we're working with any sort of form element, especially where we're entering text, whatever numeric information that you would happen to type in is a string on a form. So one of the points here with these highlights is that whatever stuff that you are pulling in, you need to actually convert to a number if it's coming in hypothetically as a number. But you can see there's a couple different challenges there. The one challenge is, okay, well, doing the conversion, we just have a little method. You can see int32 is the built-in method in the .NET framework for converting to a number from a string. So for example, you ask somebody to type in a zip code, right? That's numeric. And then you convert it to a string. Would you guys argue that the zip code would need to be converted to a string? I mean, converted to a number from a string? Right, but I mean, in terms of like putting it in a database, does it have to be a number? No, it could be a string, right? Is there a reason why you would choose to use it as a number as opposed to a string? Yeah, sorting might be one of those things. Although I guess you could do that alphanumerically. What about the amount of memory it consumes? That might be one of the reasons. You know, the reality is you know, a zip code, you're not going to be doing math with it, right? So you might actually opt to leave that as a string, right? But if you were grabbing some sort of information that does need to be mathematically manipulated, you better really make sure that it is a number coming in. So that's just kind of a scenario for you to consider. Now, whenever that's the case, you guys will be responsible for understanding that and making sure that there's a conversion that takes place. That's really something that those of you that have already done PHP should have learned at least a little bit, right? And you maybe even learned a little bit of that when you do database work as well.
Converting the number to like an int or whatever your data type is, and you would.
Yeah. So basically, the question is, you're saying that you have to bring in the numbers, right? And you need to convert it from a string to numbers, and then you have to validate that they're right anyhow. Or Yeah, well, yeah, that can be distinct steps. Yeah, you know, really what we're focusing on here more so is the validation piece. But the reason that we bring in this conversion thing is because you guys need to be aware of the fact that if you're going to be feeding it into a database is expecting a number, you better be converting it to numeric format so that it can read it. Okay, so I mean, you could have validation that ensures that it's a number, or you run those methods that we were just looking at to force it to become a number. All right, let's say I got a few highlights here. I like this little statement here. It says, never trust user input. And as a designer, right, that's, you know, and a developer that's creating these pages, really that should kind of be the mentality you take. Because whether it be by intent that somebody's putting in something wrong, because people do that, or, you know, they just make a mistake and, you know, the number keys and letter keys are pretty close together. They might type in a letter and break things, right? Because if somebody typed in, let's say, a zip code and they mistakenly hit the letter Y and you needed to convert it to a number, now what's going to happen? Right, so you can see why validation might come in handy there. All right, so here it says that ASP.NET has 6 different controls that you can use, and most of them, you know, the 5 out of the 6 are things that you can attach to the objects, and the other one is something that basically validates the information and helps us to push out the error messages if it's not working right. Okay, so that's what the validation summary tool is about. You're going to see that when you do a little bit of poking around here in the interface, that they actually have a little toolbox section for validation. So you can see all the different things that you can put in. The ones that we're interested in are the 5 at the bottom. You notice how they have one for pointer too? Why would you have to validate a pointer? How about making sure the mouse is over the right part of the screen before somebody clicks or double clicks or releases? Okay, that's the why for that one. But we're interested in the ones at the bottom, and they're tailored to do very specific things. Now our goal, of course, would be to create something that is like this, right? So you have a form, it needs to be filled in, and then the first little example there, they didn't put in their name, so it pops up a thing in red, it says enter your name, and then they're asking you to put in a number, and somebody says, well, I am 41, and of course we just need a number, thank you very much. And even if you did the conversion on that, that wouldn't convert really, so that's one of the reasons also why we need the validation. Now the cool thing about the ASP.NET environment, and if you're seeing this clearly, it says you can check the input at the client and the server. And actually that's true really for any language, honestly. But from the client, I mean, what can we do at the client to check and validate? I mean, we just talked about HTML5. What other technology did I talk about? JavaScript. Now, one thing that the author here does mention, and that's like the lowest highlight on the page there, is that client-side validation is cool because it really takes the burden off the server, and before the user even sends the information off back to the server, you can have it validated so you know you're getting the right stuff. But see, there's a little caveat there. You can turn JavaScript off. So then your validation, if that's your only validation, it's going to break. You can very easily break an application. And then you're relying on the database to throw its errors. And if you wrote your code to even show the errors, a lot of people don't, how are you going to know? Are you going to break your database? Are you going to break your application? So you have to usually use multiple layers of things. So now most people don't turn JavaScript off, but I'll tell you what, in the past they did because people would be paranoid. You know, because they get these weird little pop-ups and messages, and it didn't help that the older browsers, Internet Explorer and Firefox way back when, would throw up these messages that would put a scare in you if JavaScript is running. That's not so much the case anymore. But really, you know, the truth is all the JavaScript can really do is trick you into doing something. It's not going to make you blow up your system. Okay? All right. So one of the things that is pretty common to do with forms is just basically make sure that somebody did fill out a form field. Like, I need your name. You can't really, get a contact for you if you don't put your name in. Who am I calling for? That type of thing. So that's one of the real common controls that you'll see used. I think what's really fascinating, if you start reading into this really carefully, when you actually are using these tools that ASP.NET has for validation, and you choose the tool, you choose some drop downs, you associate it with a field. Really what it's doing in the background is it's writing the JavaScript validation for you. That's all it's doing. So it really is taking a lot of the work out of it, all the busy work. I used to teach a JavaScript class way back when, and one of the grand goals of the whole class was to teach people how to write validation scripts. And we would spend weeks doing that because some of these tools, at least back then, didn't really exist. So you guys have this great benefit that if you know the concept of what validation is and how it works, that's almost enough because you can just apply the tool and get it to function. Mix in a little bit of HTML5 where you can check things in the client, and see, that's the nice thing about HTML5 and one of the reasons why they added like the required field or the regular expressions to some of those input types, because that way that you can't turn off. You can't turn off HTML5. So that was one of the reasons why they came up with that. So it's kind of like another layer of defense. So you're going to have a little thing that you do here, and you can see a highlighted contact form. You're going to be adding a contact form to the site in the form of a control. So you notice the file extension there is ASCX. So that's one of those tools. You build a contact form in this environment. You have one now. Pick it up, take it to any project you want. Complete with the validation. Greg? Oh, yeah. Just go into the settings of your browser. There's a spot you can turn it on and off. With Chrome, it's very easy to do. Firefox, I think, is somewhat easy to do. Internet Explorer was kind of a nightmare to turn it off because they'd have like about 50 different settings for different scripting technologies, and nobody knew what button to press. So it's like, let's just try all of them. Or they have some pre-configured like medium safe, or really safe, or not safe at all, and none of those are really particularly useful in my mind. All right, so you guys are going to go through this little exercise. You're going to be creating, and I'm not sure if you can make it out on the screen here, basically a table that's going to hold form fields. And that, frankly, that's a real common way to build forms, or at least it used to be, where you wanted stuff to line up. One of the best ways to line up form components was to put it inside of a table. And that's what they do here. Truth be told, you don't really need to put things inside of a table. But one of the reasons that they're doing that is because by creating separate rows and columns where you'll have a label, the input control, and then really a blank spot here. Right here it'll say required field validator, and you will see that when you're coding, but that's not something the user is going to see. It's just showing you that you put a validator in that position that's attached to this input field. Therefore, when you run the validation and the validation summary returns something to you, the error message will end up in that field, including a message that goes with it. And all that's kind of like automatic little tools. You just have to like type in the error message. You could change the color of the font and all that kind of stuff. You do it all within there. And they're going to show you here some of the properties that you can set, and they'll step you through it piece by piece, so it's not that difficult to do. All right. Now they are pointing out here, like I just was, a lot of the HTML5 improvements. Once again, I'll remind you that this book was printed, I think, prior to HTML5 officially becoming a standard, or right around the time it was becoming a standard. So they knew the things that were coming down the line and what they would do. And, you know, prior to HTML5, we had like a certain set of input types that we could use on forms. And you guys have learned this stuff already, or should have. But HTML5 brought with it all these new types of inputs. And you might recognize some of these from the things we were doing in Web 2 and some of our other classes. So you can see that we actually have form fields for color and date time and email and things like that. And those are all pretty useful. And the reason they're pointing them out here is because at the time of the printing of this book, it was that new that people didn't even know that they were available. But they are available, and you should feel free to play with those things if it's helpful. You know, they give a little example of what these things look like in the different browsers. Like, for example, if you were going to do a range control in Internet Explorer, it looks like that. If you do one in Chrome, it looks like that. And these are things that you've probably seen in your browser as you're working. But, you know, things evolve and change over time. But I think it's fascinating when you look at the results of what these things look like. All right, the validation controls do also come with their own set of properties that you'll see in the property windows, some of which are listed here. It's not all of them. And these are all things that you can tweak and adjust and have settings for. There's either little drop downs or spots where you type stuff in. And I think most of them are fairly self-explanatory. If you're not sure what they do, chances are you probably either don't need it or you can look it up if you do. Okay? They're going to walk you through a pretty rudimentary set of things here. You know, I'll say common contact form type of stuff. All right. And then what we're hoping to see eventually when our validation is working, an output that looks similar to this. So notice that one of their approaches is to put a little red asterisk in that third column if there's a problem, and then an error message in red at the bottom. And that's not how you have to do it, but this is what they're guiding you to do. So we're learning at this point, so it's okay to just follow their example. Yeah, it is. But I'll tell you what, there's many different ways to do, you know, form validation messages. I think that a real common modern approach is if you're going to put in an error message, it might not be as useful to put enter your username at the bottom of the screen. It might be more useful to like maybe point it out right here, on, you know, a little bit more visibly than a red asterisk that might get lost. And when you guys put in that red asterisk, I might even suggest to you to make it more visible that you either make it bold or a larger font size. That's something you could do because it really does make it show. And you can also trigger other things to happen too if you wanted to. You could write your own custom code. And, you know, like one of the validation techniques I like to use is maybe taking the text input box and changing the border from black to red, and then putting the focus of my cursor back into the box. You know, that's a technique I like to use because that way, here's the error, start typing something. You didn't put in your name, right? So things to consider. They walk through some of the other tools that you can use. The one I'm going to stop at here is what we call the regular expression validator. We have learned a little bit about regular expressions and how they work. I've never gone through the process of completely memorizing how to put together regular expressions. I mean, I can look at one and pretty much figure it out, but there's entire references online for it. In fact, if you really are into regular expressions, they make books like 2 inches thick on how to do them. I don't know what they fill those pages with, but it must be something. But the cool thing about regular expressions is that validation format works. It now works in HTML5. It works with JavaScript. It works with just about every programming language I can even think of. They've just become kind of an adopted standard that is pulled into various languages. And I think that's kind of a neat thing. More properties there. All right, so then they're going to have you add a few more things to the form. And then as you're working, you're going to see stuff that looks like this. And I'm going to just very quickly scroll past that and go to the next section. Now, the next little thing is getting yourself ready to do both the client and the server side combination. There is, really the best practice to doing validation is to have multiple layers. You guys know from your database studies, right, that you need to have certain types of data to go into certain types of field. You can't use just characters for everything, right? Varchar or whatever you want to call it. Sometimes you need numeric formats, sometimes they need to be specific lengths, sometimes they need to be specific values. And you guys also have learned at this point that you can write your database to kind of do some of that validation for you. The problem is what happens when the data is wrong with the database. Yeah, you have to write exception handlers to work around it if there's a problem. And then to make it really useful, you have to also allow the database to send messages back that will show you the error code. Now, of course, the user doesn't care at all about what database error they're seeing, right? Oh, look, it's SQL exception error number 432, right? Irrelevant. So you're in the situation where you have to control that. Once again, a slick little exercise here, some JavaScript and stuff you have to throw in. But let's get down to the last part here. All right. If you do get in a position where your application does throw an exception, you need to have a way to handle that exception, because the last thing you want to see is something that looks like this on a web page. Right? And right now, just so you guys know, my SharePoint server is doing exactly that. So let me fix it. No, it's not. But I'm going to fix it, I swear. All right. Yes. Crazy glue. All right. This little section here is kind of interesting as well, because what this is talking about, and you guys might not think about this, let's say you're working in WordPress, and you guys, many of you have built WordPress sites, and you get to the point where you have forms on the page, right? And maybe some of you have even experienced the fact that people will find your WordPress site and start to make comments, right? Now you can turn that feature off so they can't even comment. And if you didn't turn off the ping back and track back thing that comes in WordPress, WordPress actually broadcasts itself so that people know it's there, which is maybe good, maybe bad. But in this situation, it can be bad because really what happened in the old days, WordPress in its primitive versions didn't have the capability to block what this author is talking about right here, which is somebody would go to a form where there's a text field and would inject HTML and or JavaScript into the site. Or even more dangerously, SQL statements. Could you imagine that if you had a form element and you were able to send a SQL statement to the database directly? You could do some pretty damaging things. So a lot of today's modern content management systems and form engines have built-in tools to prevent the ability for you to enter in any sort of code into a form field. So you can just enter text. The moment it sees any HTML tags or JavaScript tags or any SQL statements, shuts it down. Now that by default in a product like ASP.NET is turned on, that protection. However, what if you were creating a website where you had a form where you allowed people to enter HTML code? Then what, right? Then you want the capability of being able to turn that off. Because there are situations like that. Have you guys ever gone to like Stack Overflow and looked up a solution to something? And then sometimes they'll have a little separate box that's got code in it. Oh, how did they put that in there? Right? So they must have had a form field that allow you to enter the code kind of in a little protected environment and allows it to be rendered to the page. And that's always one of those challenging little questions too. You go to a web page to learn about coding a web page. How do they put HTML code on an HTML page without having it be HTML code? I'll let you ponder that one. The answer is actually pretty simple. If you paid attention in class back then, you probably would know the answer, but you can look it up. All right, so I think I covered all the topics here. All right, so they also talk here about processing data at the server. In this chapter, they're not pushing you into database stuff yet. Okay. In this book, they go to database stuff in, I think, like chapter 12 or 13 or 14 or something. And they actually deal with real database interactions. The server-side interaction that they're showing you in this last section is how to send an email, right? Maybe in your PHP class, depending on your instructor, you guys ran like some send mail scripts, and you know, if Christian or I turned the script on to allow you to send mail, it would actually work. But typically a lot of systems don't even allow that. Usually you have to go to your own private hosting to allow for sending email. To make things even more confusing, a lot of email hosts, so let's say Gmail for example, they don't like you relaying your email. And what I mean by relaying is I'm on one system and I decide to send a message, and instead of using my send mail server on my system, I send it off through the internet to go to Google servers to send it through their servers. You know what most hosting providers say? You cannot relay. Have you guys ever had difficulty setting up email on your phone? Right? Now, a lot of companies have gotten wise to that now, and you know, it's a little bit smoother. But it used to be you'd have to pull all sorts of little tricks to get, you know, like if you took your Time Warner email account and you try to send through your phone, it was kind of a little bit of a nightmare. And now that's been smoothed out quite a bit. But the challenge in this section is to get the stuff in the form to actually email. Fair warning, it is not easy to accomplish. I do have videos that are posted where I step through it. And I was just looking at them just a few minutes before doing this, and I got, I think, a series of 3 or 4 or 5 videos, and we got to the part of sending the email, and it wouldn't work, and we ran out of class time, so I couldn't finish recording it, and the next day at home, I recorded it and showed people how to do it. But it's a combination of a lot of different settings. First of all, your email host that you're going to send through has to allow the traffic. That's important. Usually the only way they're going to allow the traffic is if you log in prior to sending the message. So usually you have to embed username and password in that scenario. Usually they'll also require that it goes through an encrypted port. Email has one port for receiving mail and a different port for sending mail. And then when you encrypt your email, there's separate ports for receiving and sending. Okay? So depending on the host, they will have different settings. And in fact, okay, so they start going through here and talking about some of the settings. So here's kind of a simplistic example where they have just example stuff put in there. But in the next one, they start to put in some more of the details. So for example, you would declare your SMTP host. SMTP is Send Mail Transfer Protocol. That's what it stands for. And username, password, and the port number. Some hosts require not that much information. Some hosts require much more information. So the thing that you'll have to be wary of, though, is sometimes they do require encryption. Sometimes it's SSL. Sometimes it's TLS. And if you guys have studied encryption at all, you'll recognize those terms. Port numbers, sometimes they use the standard port numbers that go with the protocol. Sometimes they'll use custom port numbers just to trip up hackers. In the video, I have settings in there that do work. So I'm going to give you a little caveat, though. If you get it to work, wonderful. If you get it not to work, that's okay. I'm not really so concerned that the emailing component actually works, because you will be limited by whatever your email hosting provider happens to give you. My really sincere hope here is that you just give it a try, and if it works, you'll feel super happy, and if it doesn't work, you'll understand the technical reasons as to why it didn't. but I'm not going to downgrade you if it doesn't work. But I do want you to go through the process of trying the exercise. We should be able to get it to work, but like I said, I'm not going to downgrade you if you don't get it to work. That is basically it in a nutshell for this chapter. I don't think there's anything else I really need to talk about. Oh, I guess I could talk about this. Now, I'm assuming those of you that are in this program that did advanced micro programming did learn a little bit about reading and writing from text files. You may have even done it a little bit in Intro to Programming, depending on your teacher, but it was pretty rudimentary. What they're indicating here is that you also have the capability to take these email messages, and instead of actually sending them, you can save them on your machine, and it goes to a special spot, folder, and location. But you also have the capability of taking the information and reading it and writing it to a file. It's not very difficult to do. Just follow the simple steps that they have here. That is a pretty powerful thing, because even though text files are kind of primitive, you know, the web runs on text files, folks.
So add to bookable, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Adding text files.
Yep, absolutely. So that's all the information I'm going to cover in this chapter, and hopefully it gives you a little bit of clarity as, when you're stepping into these exercises and what you're working on. There are a few challenging things in this chapter, but if you, like, once again, read those instructions and the step-by-steps real carefully. Don't let your mind skip over the words, because I know mine does. And then if I were to be an editor on the next version of this book and a rewrite, I would go through and I would just take a few statements and make them bold or underlined, and that would probably fix most of those issues. Like, click here, that kind of thing. But otherwise, just go slow, read carefully. All right, and if you have any questions, you know where to find me, and good luck on the assignment.